Greetings. I had trouble finding many people that wanted to speak about criminal justice reform, but I put together a couple of videos for you I think you might enjoy that deal with current issues in the criminal justice system, and I have at least one speaker coming on soon to speak about criminal justice reform. Most of my experience comes from the West Coast. I grew up mostly in Washington State on the more conservative East Side and the more liberal West Side. I also lived in California, Sacramento to be exact, and Los Angeles, and more recently here in the beautiful state of Hawaii. And most tourists consider it to be paradise. But believe me, we are not immune from some of the problems on the mainland, especially when it comes to the need for criminal justice reforms. Now, most parts of the country consider the left coast to be extremely liberal, and I have to agree with them for the most parts, although there are some counties in Washington, Oregon, and California that are considered to be red counties, more conservative, and tend to vote Republican. But they are far outnumbered by blue counties. I consider myself to be more the color purple, and Hawaii is definitely a Democratic stronghold. And the situation here is unique in some ways, and like I said, in some ways, the problems are very similar to the mainland. In particular, meth is a huge problem here. Most of the crime, I would say, revolves around the use of methamphetamine. So car thefts are high, as well as abandoned vehicles that litter the beautiful Aina everywhere, and burglaries of property are also high. Basically, here, if it isn't tied down, they're going to steal it. And of course, methamphetamine is a big problem all along the West Coast also, and even more so now, there is fentanyl use in the big cities that is even spread now into the medium-sized cities and even to the small towns. The last time when I was recently in Seattle and worked in Tacoma, I couldn't believe how bad it was. My beautiful city has turned to trash. And I blame the politicians for most of it. The Los Angeles area, where my wife is from, is not much better. I subtitled this particular episode, Are We Getting Social Justice or Anarchy? Let's take, for instance, the takeover of a Seattle police station located on Capitol Hill a couple of years ago. Now, I used to run this same area back in the late 1970s. In fact, I would run from First and Pike all the way up to Broadway and Pike, and every place in between. The area where the takeover took place is located very close to Seattle Central Community College. And I remember the Broadway area of Capitol Hill being a hub for many cool shops, eating and drinking establishments, and small businesses. I always felt a peaceful vibe when I was there and never felt that my personal safety was at risk. My, how things have changed. Let's take a look at a video of the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone during the takeover.
On the 12th consecutive night of protests in Seattle, hundreds of people stormed City Hall and demanded the resignation of Mayor Jenny Durkan. The protesters were reportedly allowed access to the building by a Seattle City Council member. Authorities in Seattle have been sharply criticised for their handling of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. As in many other US cities, some people are now calling for the city police department to be defunded. Protests have been held every day here since video was released showing the killing of George Floyd. But tensions reached a boiling point over the weekend. Capitol Hill resembled a battlefield as police deployed tear gas to disperse crowds. Just one day after the mayor announced a 30-day ban on its use.
They're pushing us into the flashbangs.
On Sunday evening, a man sped his car into demonstrators, shooting one of them in the arm as he came to a stop. He then got out and brandished his gun at those around him before handing himself in to police. But now, law enforcement have retreated from Capitol Hill in what they've described as an exercise in trust and de-escalation. Protesters have established a barricaded autonomous zone around the local police precinct, which appears to have been evacuated.
By the way, a kid was killed shortly after this video in that very same park that was shown at the end. Yes, he is believed to have been a gang member from a nearby neighborhood, but that doesn't excuse the taking of his life. Multiple other innocent people were seriously hurt during and after the takeover, many at the hands of rioters or thugs that came out at night. It should be noted that the councilperson who let the protesters into City Hall, as shown on the video, initially blamed all these attacks on right-wing elements, despite substantial evidence to the contrary. She also proposed the nationalization and taking over of Boeing, Microsoft, and Amazon, as well as other big corporations in the Seattle area. All three of these mega corporations pay pretty good wages and benefits. And when they were confronted about this proposal by her and like-minded individuals, they suggested that they may relocate to other parts of the country. She then labeled this economic terrorism, yet she led multiple protests to the homes of people she didn't agree with so that protesters could harass them in their own homes after work hours. She also suggested that mansions on Capitol Hill, many of them been in families for many years, be confiscated and turned into apartments for the poor. In another boneheaded move, on May 1st, a few years ago, she led a protest on Interstate 5 and blocked traffic for hours, supposedly for workers' rights. However, I know many individuals who actually caught up in that mess, and they were trying to get to work, and they were very upset, yelling, "Get the hell off the highway so we can get to work." I don't think she caught the irony of this. In 2021, she barely survived a recall vote and has decided not to run for re-election next time around. Good thing. I don't know how some of these people got into office in the first place. Many of the individuals participating in social justice protests were anarchists, and I think they gave social justice a bad name. Most of them had zero experience living and working with Black and brown communities. They just wanted to see places burned down and rioting, anything that could be considered anti-cop. In addition to many being too harsh on police officers, I believe a lot of police officers and parts of the general public believe that the criminal justice system has become too lenient in many cases. For instance, I have mentioned this in regards to car theft. Right now, basically, you could steal anything you want. Cars, clothes, anything in stores, anything in anybody's yard, and get away with it. There is virtually no repercussions for juveniles today.
Gabe, thanks so much for talking with us on the Spotlight. You have been an expert for us on prior broadcasts, and we appreciate that. I want to ask you tonight about the TikTok Kia boys and some of these young teens, 13 years old, out stealing Kias and then committing armed robberies and drive-by shootings. Are you hearing that this is part of the gang life now here?
Yes, I am, David. It is a relatively recent occurrence in the Seattle-Tacoma area. I believe a lot of these kids saw a TikTok video. I think it came out of Milwaukee at first, and it showed these guys how to use a USB port to basically start these Korean-made Hyundais and Kia cars very easily, hotwire them, and take off within, a minute or so. So that seems to be happening here now locally in the Puget Sound region.
A lot of these kids are PR'd. They're released from jail right away once they're arrested in a stolen car. Some of them are brought back to their parents, but many of them are runaways. What is the solution to proper juvenile justice so that these kids can get on the right path, but also so people can be protected? They are doing drive-by shootings of occupied homes.
Correct. They're not just stealing the cars, David, as you mentioned. They're doing drive-bys, they're doing carjackings, robberies, other crimes. Marijuana, I think you have mentioned on some of the other shows, marijuana shops are being ripped off left and right. And so these kids also know, because they're juveniles, that they're not going to do a lot of time. I looked up the recent RCW for juvenile car theft, which is 13.40.308. And it shows how lenient really the laws are. Now, I'm not one that says, hey, these kids steal a car first time, they should do a year in jail. I'm not saying that. But I think what has happened is it has become too lenient, and adults know how lenient it is for juveniles, and they're coaching these kids. Hey, nothing's going to happen to you. You could do this, do that. You could do it like 20 times before something seriously really happens to you. You also have people asking for leniency for individuals who have committed murder. For instance, William Tolliver was a gang member charged with first-degree murder and 6 counts of first-degree assault. He shot at another guy in downtown Seattle in a well-known drug and gang hangout with no concern whatsoever for anybody else, not even himself, in January 2020.
We know that gun violence has struck our city in many ways, from suicides to mass shootings, where innocent victims are caught in the crossfire, to one in Lake City last year, to gun violence in Rainier Beach. And last evening, during the peak of our rush hour, a dispute between 2 individuals escalated into gun violence in one of the most crowded and busiest blocks of our downtown city. Bullets hit innocent men, women, and at least 1 child. As a result, 7 people were injured and 1 additional person died on the scene. During rush hour, this is one of our busiest corridors, with families shopping, workers leaving their offices, individuals walking home, and commuters catching the bus or light rail. It's estimated that almost 50,000 people or more board buses on 3rd Avenue every day. Most of us in the city have walked that block about that time of day. I have done it hundreds of times in my life. And no one, absolutely no one in our city or country should step out of a coffee shop or get on a bus with fear of violence. Many of us have friends or family who were near the location or lived in the area or worked in the area. It was a terrifying experience for them and traumatic for our whole city.
Last night, it was unacceptable, and we know this. It was a large scene. We weren't clear when we first got there if we had an active shooter or what was happening, so we had to make sure we had active intelligence about what was going on. And as the mayor mentioned, it was over a block and a half victimization. So it was a pretty large scene for us to secure. We know that we have 2 subjects that were in front of the McDonald's, and some sort of dispute occurred with the 3rd person being there. Guns were pulled, shots were fired, people were running, and the subjects fled from each other. That's what we know, that's what we walked into.
One of the injured that he shot was even a child who will be traumatized now, probably for the rest of their life. And so after only 3 years of being locked up, Mr. Tolliver was let loose on home detention by a judge. And his running partner, Marquise Tolbert, was found not guilty in that case, arguing that it was self-defense because the other guy was shooting at him. And that another individual, Jackson, was the primary aggressor in that case. He was only found guilty of unlawful possession of a firearm and sentenced to 16 months in prison in 2021. So he's already out. None of this bodes well for public safety. Some people are not taking this issue very serious. I believe the anti-woke people had a legitimate point sometimes that we are too weak and too lenient, that we are creating a generation of entitled individuals. That you can ask anybody. I'm all for good intervention and helping individuals who legitimately want to change their behaviors, but they got to be ready for change and actually do things that move towards that goal. There has to be repercussions. It can't be all carrot and it can't be all stick. Police officers have told me that it's basically impossible for them to arrest juveniles today. Affordable housing is certainly a big issue in Seattle and in many other U.S. cities. Perhaps I'll get into that discussion in a future episode. But for now, as far as the homeless, I know there are a lot of people that propose building tiny homes for them or other forms of housing. Sounds great and ideal, but perhaps not grounded in reality. From my experiences, many of the homeless are extremely drug and alcohol addicted, and many have severe mental health issues, and they don't want to abide by any rules. I understand even the 1st and 2nd floor of the King County Jail on 5th and James, where I used to work, were suggested to be turned into housing for the homeless. I understand a lot of money was spent to do this, However, when it came to some ground rules, it was discovered that most of the people didn't want to abide by them, whether it's on the street or elsewhere. Many of these individuals don't want to put trash in canisters or in bags that could be easily disposed of. Many would rather urinate and defecate in the street than use a restroom, even if it was provided for them. I have spoken to many of these individuals, and they don't even like staying at the Union Gospel Mission because there's rules there. They have to listen to the sermons. They have to be in by a curfew and stay quiet after hours. They don't like that. They're used to sleeping in all day and partying all night. So without them being enrolled in some concrete change programs, drug rehab, mental health counseling, etc., I don't think that will work. Many of the people making these proposals have never done the work. Now, I think I can speak with some authority. I've been involved with volunteer programs, public assistance, community service organizations for many years. All of these programs have helped a lot of people who wanted and were ready for help. I'm all about giving a helping hand to those who need it, like a mother with children escaping a domestic violence situation, or a man who has lost his job and needs some assistance until he can find future employment. But what I am not for is a handout. The word gets out. I bet if you did a survey of many of the homeless presently in Seattle, many of them are not even from there, but they traveled there, especially during the months when the weather is better, like May through October, because they know the area is known for having a lot of free services. Like I said, I'm not against helping people who need it, but sometimes it can be counterproductive. Offering these services can attract a shady element. I've even overheard homeless drug addicts here in Hawaii talk about Freeattle. That's what they call Seattle. One's talking to the other, he says, yeah, let's go to Freeattle and get us some free shit. And it's not just there. I was recently at a food bank operated out of a church here in Hawaii, and I viewed a mother with several children waiting in line. She asked a friend to watch her kids while she went inside. She came out with 2 bags of groceries and was elated. She said that the organizers felt sorry for her, so she got double up on everything. And I could understand this given all the mouths she had to feed. But then she said something that shocked me. She said, all right, I scored. Now I can go down to the park and buy more drugs. My jaw dropped, and I felt very sorry for the children who did not look well taken care of. Now you might ask, why didn't I call Child Protective Services on her? Well, I inquired about this individual, and I was told by several people in the know that had already been done several times, and nothing ever happened. Oh, did I mention that I did a college internship with the California Department of Corrections monitoring a sex offender program? On several of my home visits with a parole officer, I found out that several molested children were put in the custody of their grandparents. They were supposed to have no contact with the father that had molested them. How well do you think that worked out? Again, I strongly believe in helping those who need it. I donate my time and money all the time to good causes, but we just can't throw money at a problem. Many people have figured out how to play the system and how to play us. The takers are often laughing at the givers. Check out Al Prophet's recent video on this subject. Basically, we've lost our morals. We've lost our respect for our elders and as far as raising our youngsters to teach them the right path. So that's my thoughts here for this video. Let me know what you think about that. Are we being too lenient with our youth, or do we need to help them more to navigate the criminal justice system and to navigate life? I hope that this provokes some well thought out comments by viewers, and that ultimately we find a lot better ways to address our current problems in the criminal justice system. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off from Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.